Now, out of this feuding, vengeful mess that is the current Iraq, the Americans must do the near impossible. They have to craft a leadership structure which, like it or not, will be Shiite-dominated, but which is acceptable to all. I have a sense that Iraq is a world of sliding doors and parallel universes in which two dialogues are being conducted. One between Washington and Baghdad, in which the Iraqis tell the Americans what they want to hear about the niceties of democracy, their dubious new constitution, and all the international treaties that they've signed. But there's a second exchange, a very different and brutal discourse among the Iraqis themselves on how they intend to carve up this country and possibly each other. There's no common ground between the key players, Shiites, Kurds, and Sunnis. The country was fashioned early last century not from the shared interests and culture of the people who came to be called Iraqis, so much as the competing strategic and commercial interests of France and Britain. Now, Saudi diplomats are traipsing Washington, warning any who will listen that their volatile neighbour Iraq is hurtling towards disintegration. The Riyadh analysis is that the entire region could now be dragged into war because, as Foreign Minister Prince Saud Al Faisal put it last week, no dynamic is pulling the nation together. Everything is pulling the country apart. Each time I've been to Baghdad in the last year, I've observed from my room in the Palestine Hotel an American-sponsored attempt to establish a park on the banks of the Tigris River. It was the brainchild of a Major Peter Chiarelli, an American who put up $1.5 million to employ locals to beautify the banks of this languid river in the hope that work might distract them from war. Grass was planted, sprinklers, water coolers, and paths installed, and then Chiarelli was rotated out of Iraq. Today the grass is dead. The paths are littered with broken glass, and the sprinkler heads have been looted. Razor wire and blast walls seal off the northern end of the park, closing it to Iraqis so that they do not draw the fire of American snipers stationed on the roof of a nearby hotel. They've gone full circle. In Saddam's days, they risked being shot if they ventured along this section of the riverbank, because just across the water was Saddam's palace, which today is the green zone in which the Americans bunker. 4 years after 9/11, 2.5 years after the invasion of Iraq, we still don't know where this country is going. It's a crisis that will play out in its own dangerous time, longer than the life of a riverside park, and longer than the leadership cycles of the United States of America, or, for that matter, Australia. I'd give it at least 10, possibly 20 years before we can judge the outcome of the US ventures in Iraq and Afghanistan, and of the extent to which they have helped or hindered in George Bush's war on terror. Hopefully, there'll be a parallel process in which Australians will observe not just outcomes along the way, but what the decisions we make say about us and our view of the world and our position in it. We voted federally on the issue of truth in leadership, and for now we seem to have decided that it didn't matter. Perhaps the security threat we faced was reason enough for us to overlook if we'd been taken for a ride. But that view will change here, just as it now seems to be changing in the US. You'll have noticed that Washington has backed right off any Iraq-type response to the axis of evil behavior of North Korea and Iran. Instead, diplomats are being allowed to do their work. In Australia, we no longer are dealing with abstract, over-there issues. Bali, 1 and 2, have positioned us as a major target, And the sense of fear is heightened by the specific mentions of Australia in messages from bin Laden and his mouthpieces in their rocky redoubts on the Afghan-Pakistan border. We have to think about outcomes in Iraq in terms of success or failure for Australians, not just for Americans. We have small troop numbers in Iraq, and a new contingent now is dug in the south of Afghanistan, engaging in dangerous work in difficult territory. But given our centre stage role, particularly in the rhetorical war on terror, is it enough to just have a few hundred troops over there, as though they're manning some sort of forward defence post? It all looks like a token contribution to the America's hunt and kill exercise. But there has to be more. We've got to try harder. Canberra now is working on setting up what is called a provincial reconstruction team in Afghanistan early next year. This is a process of mixing humanitarian and security tasks, and it's long overdue for Australia. By contrast, New Zealand is fully established in the Central Highlands of Afghanistan, successfully helping to extend the authority of a still feeble new government in a way that does more to put down democratic roots than just chasing terror suspects in the hills. Perhaps I could finish with a true story of last Anzac Day in the Iraqi desert. It's funny, sad, and it's dangerous all at the same time. But it might also help to make you think about gulfs and bridges between cultures, Iraqi and Australian, media and military. In a rare easing of its restrictive media policy, the Australian Defence Forces decided that reporters could attend the Anzac Day memorial service at Camp Smithy, the Australian base at Al-Muthana in the southwest of Iraq. As advised by the military, I went to see an Australian contingent at the British base in the southern city of Basra on the afternoon of April 24. Everything seemed fine. They had found a bit of space for me in a tent, they told me, and that I should head for Camp Smithy, which was 4 or 5 hours by road to the west. Could I have a map? No. Directions? Okay. A driver was called in to explain the way. We set off, me, Salam, my fixer, and Mohammed, our driver. We got to the city of Samawa, but try as we might, we could not make sense of the directions they had given us in Basra. We stopped at a gas station and struck up conversation with a local engineer. Did he know an Australian base in the area? Yes, he did. And he offered to show us the way. But the road he took went in the opposite direction to that of the directions we'd been given by the Australians. It was dark now. A dust storm had reduced visibility to 10 metres, and we were breaking one of the most basic survival rules for foreigners in Iraq. Don't be out after dark. When we stopped at an intersection, I told our local guide that we were going the wrong way. Did he know another military base in the area, a new operation? Yes, he did. We were about to head off again when a flashing blue light emerged from the dust and announced that we had company. He was armed, and he was wearing a police uniform. But in Iraq, that doesn't mean he was a policeman. Many kidnappers wear police or army gear. He took one look at me, and then at Salam, and he decided that Salam must have kidnapped me. Salam and I, meanwhile, looked at each other, debating whether he really was a policeman or whether he was a kidnapper. The policeman ordered our guide to skip it because he was taking us in. We drove off into the swirling dust with him sitting on the back seat, training his gun on both of us. It was unsettling because he was in no hurry to get to a police station. Instead, he continued his patrol of the outskirts of the city, which left us even more worried as to whose custody we were in. Finally, he did deliver us to a police station, which in turn delivered us to a British Army camp, where we were told that the directions we'd been given in Basra were the mirror image of how we needed to get to the Aussies at Camp Smitty. The Poms got on the radio to Smitty to say that we were on our way. It was now close to 11 p.m. But the Australians suddenly and inexplicably withdrew the welcome mat. After driving around for hours, we were now being told that we were not welcome, and there was no camp stretcher with my name on it. Finally, we found a local hotel, and because it was to be a dawn service, we hit the road again at 4 a.m. Still in the dark, still breaking that vital rule of survival. We took a wrong turn and got lost again. But happily, we encountered a heavy gate and a guard's hut. In the current climate, it's not a good idea to go knocking on anyone's door in the middle of the night in Iraq. But one of the guards emerged and volunteered to show us the way to the Australian camp. But then his older colleague climbed out of his bed and emerged from the hut, bellowing that this was a setup and that we were kidnappers attempting to abduct the other guard and that we were planning to demand a ransom. At this stage, I was beginning to wonder whether I was going to get to dawn service at all. Our denials were in vain. If it wasn't so serious, I might have thought that we were in a sort of long-running Monty Python sketch. But Salam moved in, as he invariably does in a crisis, and hit upon a very Iraqi solution. If one of the guards would come with us, he proposed, we would leave Mohammed, our driver, with the other guard, and we could have a hostage swap later, after dawn service. We got to the service, I did my reporting, we drove back and swapped hostages, and I managed to file my report on time. Mission accomplished. Thank you.
Wow. What an amazing, amazing lecture. The pessimism has got inside me. I don't know how much of it I'll be able to get rid of. I'm not going to thank Paul because that's somebody else's job tonight, but Paul has kindly agreed to answer or take comments from people. We've got about a quarter of an hour, Leanne? Okay. Paul? And there are two microphones, handheld microphones. One is here and one is on the other side. So please, can you make your way towards a microphone when you're ready to speak? And one of you, the first one was there, yes?
Paul, I'd be interested in your thoughts on the use of depleted uranium weapons in Iraq and the exposure to Australian forces of that type of weaponry.
I've done some work on this in Basra before I got lost. It's a serious issue. If you go into the cancer hospital and the children's hospital in Basra, it's enough to make you cry. The number of cases of leukemia. If you go in day by day, sometimes you see an empty bed and you suddenly think, oh, things are looking up, and you're told, no, the child died overnight. And somebody else wants the bed and they'll have it by lunchtime. No serious study, the results of any serious studies that have been done have not been released. The World Health Organization is trying to set one up. It's meeting resistance from the Americans, from the British, but quite clearly there is a correlation between the rates of cancers in the south of Iraq and areas where depleted uranium munitions were used. The Australians are quite removed geographically from the area where most of them were used, and they're confident publicly that it's not an issue or a problem for them.